Have you ever faced something in your life where you absolutely knew that it was beyond your capability to do, and then found something inside of you where you're able to turn on a dime? And I don't mean gradually over time, I mean turn instantaneously in that moment and then do it? I think back on my life, and I'm not sure I can identify many times when that's happened, and the only one that comes to mind happened just recently. And I'd like to share that with you because it totally has affected my thinking on a number of different things. But as part of that, it seems like when you have one experience, your mind opens up and it allows you to see other experiences in a completely different way. So shortly having this experience that I'm going to share with you in a moment, about where I was able to take a belief system, something I totally knew I couldn't do, and turn it on a dime, I want to tell you about a couple of other experiences that led to that. Napoleon Hill. I think you know who Napoleon Hill is. He wrote the book Think and Grow Rich. He was like the seminal thinker. It's the seminal text on positive thinking. And he wrote that in 1937. And at that time, think about the conditions of the time. Hitler was on everybody's mind. You know, everybody was afraid of where he was going, what he was doing. Mussolini, Stalin, and they were just coming out of the worst depression ever. And people had lost their money. In fact, Napoleon Hill, most people don't know that, he lost all of his wealth during that time. Napoleon Hill's unique ability was his ability to interview people and extract from them nuggets to be able to be used by himself and others. And he really was a great teacher, and he would go around speaking about these nuggets. And he had identified several nuggets, and crowds would fill up on how you could take these nuggets and rebuild your wealth. But when he looked in the mirror, what he saw was a man who had lost everything. And he had to ask himself, how can I go around telling people how to make money when I don't have any money myself, when I don't have a dime in the bank? So he said, I'm going to take all of this knowledge that I've learned by interviewing the greats like Andrew Carnegie, like Ford, like Roosevelt, and all of the leaders, business leaders that he knew that were very successful, combine them. And he says, I'm going to take those and implement them in my life. And out of that sprang Think and Grow Rich, which to this day still is one of the top-selling books. If you haven't read that, you better read it. Now, what you don't know is that in 1938, the very next year, he wrote a book called Outwitting the Devil. Now, just the title, when I heard that, intrigued me. Well, why haven't I read that before? Because it wasn't published till last year. 1938 to last year. Why? His wife wouldn't let him. The information that he got from interviewing the devil was too critical of the religious leaders, the political leaders, the educational leaders, and families. And she said, that's going to cause you more grief. Do not publish it. So till his death, he never published it. She passed away 14 years later. It never got published. And it stayed in their foundation, managed by her nephew, and he chose not to publish it. So the family just decided last year, it's time to let this book out. Well, when I heard about that, which was just about 6 weeks ago, I got pretty excited. I was in Denver, and so I tried to download it on my Kindle, but for some reason I couldn't, so I got the audio version, and I listened to it from Denver to Salt Lake City. And that kept me focused. The trip passed like this, because here you have a human, Napoleon Hill, having all the rights to ask the devil any question he wanted to ask and have the devil answer it. To give you an idea on his insight, now remember this is 1937, he asked the devil, he said, what are some of your greatest tools? And one of those great tools that he talked about, he said, well, alcohol and tobacco. And Napoleon Hill said, well, I can understand alcohol, but tobacco? Now, we know about tobacco today, but in 1937, everybody smoked. I mean, can you remember the movies? You see everybody smoking in the movies? So why did he say? So he asked, why tobacco? And he said, well, I know that with tobacco, I can cause even the most stalwart of people to start drifting. Because what Satan called his followers, or those that he had control over, followers isn't the right word, those that he could have control, that he could exercise some control over, he called them his drifters. Because they didn't have definiteness of purpose. and they would start to drift. And when they started to drift, then that would allow him to enter their minds and to have influence over them. So he said, when you start smoking, you start giving away power to addictions. You start giving power to a narcotic that, causes you to drift. And he says, then I can get in and have control. And what was really interesting, now remember, this was 1937, he said, and I've got future narcotics that are going to come out in future generations that are going to give me even more control over the people. How insightful for Napoleon Hill in 1937 to kind of see this. And he talks about how do you affect political leaders, countries? How do you get whole countries to start thinking a certain way and to collapse, to maybe have a depression or some form of political collapse? He talked about what was happening in the homes and how children's minds were not allowed to be able to think on their own, and the religious leaders and the education leaders. And when you read it, I predict that when you read that, you're going to say, this was written for today. This has been set aside for the last 70 some odd years to come out now, because it has great application. Have you ever been to a movie where it was a good movie and you left, but the next day it's still turning in your head and it kind of gets better because you're asking new questions and different questions? You're looking at things differently, a different light on things. Well, that's what happened to me when I'm reading this book. I started asking different questions. Now, let me share one with you that has really intrigued me and stayed with me. Napoleon Hill asked the devil, "Devil, can you be positive?" Absolutely not. It's absolutely impossible for me to be positive. And guess what? It's also impossible for my adversary, which would be God, to be negative. And you humans, you're lucky because you can choose to be either positive or negative. He says, I have no choice. I'm always negative. God has no choice. He's always positive. And my first thought was, because I don't agree with everything that's in the book, but everything is thought-provoking. I agree with most of it. But on this, I wasn't sure where I came down on that. Could God be actually, if God's all-powerful, couldn't he be negative if he wanted to be? But then you think about it, if he's a supreme being and he is positive, how could he even entertain a negative thought if he really is positive? So what does that mean for us? What does that mean when I start thinking about it? So when I'm thinking a negative thought, does that move me closer or farther away from my supreme being? Does that move me closer or farther away from God? And so that whole process started thinking. All right, now let me shift another one. Short experience happened thereafter, maybe a week later. My mother, who is, bless her heart, in my opinion, one of the most positive people that's ever walked the earth. She has a personality that is contagious. She laughs all the time. If you tell her, I know your son Lee Brower, you better watch out, she's going to give you a big hug and probably kiss you right on the neck. And then she'll laugh, and you'll hear the laugh from all around the block. She's inspired audiences. She's a great speaker. She's a great leader. And she's a great mother. And her positivity has had a huge influence on me to this very day. But lately, as I'm talking to my mom, I'm sensing tremendous amount of negativity. She had some health problems lately. She's 85, a young 85. But she's had some issues with her health. And all of a sudden, she's in this negative spiral. So I call her up. I said, Mom, how you doing, Mom? She says, oh, Lee, I'm old. She says, I don't feel good. I don't want to get out of bed in the morning. I'm not happy. I said, Mom, this does not sound like you. You're the person that has inspired hundreds of people. You've been an inspiration to me my entire life. This just does not sound like you. So I shared with her what I had just read from Outwitting the Devil. And I talked to her about how the devil can't be positive, God can't be negative. So when you're negative, which side are you coming down on? And then I said, Mom, you've always been so positive. One of the great things, one of the great traditions has been, as long as I can remember, every year of my life, you have called me on my birthday. You either called me or you've been there with me, and you've sung happy birthday to me. And it's one of the things that I look forward to every single year. Now, Mom, my birthday was 2 weeks ago. You didn't call me. Silence on the phone. She said, your birthday was 2 weeks ago? I said, it was 2 weeks ago, Mom. June 28th. Oh, I didn't call you? No. Mom, would you say you've been kind of having a bad attitude lately? Would you say you've been a little negative? She says, oh, but I don't feel good. So when you're negative, who are you thinking about, Mom? Are you thinking about others, or are you thinking about yourself? That was a hard thing for me to say to my mom. But you know what? She took it great. She says, I've been thinking about myself, son. Thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. Can you help me to start thinking about others again? And what a great moment for me as her son to be able to share that with you. So you can see how it's all kind of come together and caused me to think. Well, what I'm asking you right now is when you're negative, stop and think about who are you thinking about. Are you thinking about yourself? It's very difficult to be negative and be thinking about other people without thinking about yourself first.